Looking for NFL football? Stop right here. You found your home for weekly NFL talk and fantasy football. Coming to you live from the BackupPunter.com. This is the Backup Punter Podcast. Now, here's your host, the man who thinks fullbacks win championships, Keegan Matheson.
Welcome back. It is episode number 22, and it comes a little quicker than you might have expected. I guess we can call this a bonus episode of the Backup Punter Podcast. After so many times of me being a little bit late, I guess there's time I can be early, the 20-second trip around the cycle. We're doing this because it is fantasy football draft time. Once you get into the second preseason game being over, you're almost done the third. I still think after the third preseason game is the best time to draft. Then you know everyone's healthy. Talk about Jordy Nelson. Talk about Kelvin Benjamin. I'm sorry. So it's about that time. And today we are going to go over my 5 rules for fantasy football drafting. I sound like a salesman already, don't I? If you just pay $19.95 8 times, you'll know how to fantasy football draft. And it's going to be not about this player is better than this player. I'm talking strategies. I'm talking ideas that I think you need to go into your fantasy football draft with. Things to think about before you go into your draft, whether it's next week, the week after, just before kickoff, whenever it may be. Go in and give yourself the best chance that you can. And isn't that what all fantasy football is about? It's giving yourself a chance and letting the players do the rest. Then later on in the show, I'll save this for the end because I assume people are more interested in fantasy football draft rules than they are my tight end rankings. Now, not everybody loves the tight ends and the fullbacks like I do. That's okay. We'll save them for the end. I'll give you my top 15, and there's some very interesting tiers that I have in mind. Well, let's not say very interesting. Don't get your hopes up. But it at least intrigued me. And then I'll give you some sleepers as well to take at the end of your draft. I think there's some good value to get at tight end, or at least it will be a valuable position. I'll explain that later. Now, as always, you can find me on Twitter at The Backup Punter. Visit thebackupppunter.com, like it on Facebook, or you can even email thebackupppunter@gmail.com if you have a story, a podcast request, anything you like. And this show is always brought to you by the fine people at Dynasty Sports Empire Fantasy Sports and the Dynasty Sports Empire Podcast Network. If you are looking for more fantasy sports podcasts, head over there. Check them out, DSE_football, if you're looking to get involved in a league. But this time of year, I'm guilty for it too. I listen to 100 fantasy football podcasts. And at a certain point, there are 2 things that you run into. Number 1, fantasy football is becoming this thing that people are a bit arrogant about. A lot of sports coverage is just people trying to be right, and that's what fantasy football is. That bugs me. It's not something to be right or wrong about. If you rank Des Bryant over Antonio Brown, you're not wrong. You just have an opinion. Whatever. And I don't like this rule of the law, this hard line thinking that comes with fantasy football. That bugs me. And there's also such a groupthink that you get into. And you'll hear an idea on one show, the next week you hear it on 45 more, and you forget what you're listening to. But that's why I recommend you jump into the Dynasty Sports Empire Podcast Network, because they know what they're talking about. But these guys also do it in a way that's easy, that's fun, that's accessible, and that's new, and that's important. So check them out. Again, on Twitter, that's DSE_football. So it's draft week. I have not drafted yet, thank God, because I had Kelvin Benjamin as a keeper in one league, and I was looking at Jordy Nelson in another league. Now again, their own personal loss and injury is much more important than my fantasy football inconvenience. Let's not forget that. But again, don't draft until you get to at least this point on the calendar. No sense drafting just because you're itching to get going. In fantasy football draft week, it is each year it's more exciting. And I don't know how old you are. I'm in my mid-20s. For me, having a fantasy football draft, I'm in a couple of leagues that have been together for 4, 5, 6 years. And every year, it's a little bit more difficult to plan a draft. And that's the beauty of it. Everybody moves away. Everyone has, you get to a certain point in life where people get real jobs, where they get up and they take their pajama pants off, they put on real clothes, and they go to an office. And they do real work. And that's great. People grow apart. But fantasy football is a great way to keep people together. Much more enjoyable than a Facebook or any of that stuff. It's a much better way to stay together. And both of my leagues, they have Facebook groups, chat rooms that we stay in and keep everything together. And it's really great. It's something to look forward to every single year. And that's my favorite part. That's why I love this time of year, because you don't see yourself just kind of gold panning the waiver wire 8-10 weeks from now, just crying your eyes out with a 3-7 fantasy team, a couple guys on injured reserve. At this time of year, you see the good. In every player you draft, you see the ceiling, not the floor. And that's why I love it. And everyone's back together. Now, speaking of back together, I got to tell you a story, a great email I got this week, just actually before the podcast, and it made my day. And it's about the side of fantasy football that really gets me going, that I love. Because, again, on these fantasy podcast shows, writing, anything, we get so caught up in, this guy's the number 7 receiver. No, he's not. He's the number 6. No, he's 8. Just all this crap that really, it doesn't matter. Fantasy football is a made-up game that we play on made-up websites on our computers. And do we do anything? We set a lineup and we watch. It gets glorified. But what I love about fantasy football, it's this way that we keep connected. And there's a lot of stories that fantasy produces. There's a lot of good that it does. I got a great email today from Mo Aurora. Now, Mo is a great comedian. You can check him out on YouTube. Also follow him on Twitter there. It's Mo Aurora Comedy. You spell that M-O-A-R-O-R-A. Mo Aurora Comedy. And Mo is in a 16-team league that's been going for a long time, and it's an auction keeper league. A lot of moving parts, though, but that's one of those leagues where if you can pull it off with the right guys, you can't beat it. You cannot beat a long-running fantasy football league. Now, Mo, it caught my eye because he is a Canadian, but he's living down in Atlanta right now as a comedian. Hotbed for comedy down there, and he's touring out of Atlanta. Well, I'm someone going from far away to Toronto. Mo is going away from it. And we're both fantasy football men, so I said, let's see what Mo's got to say here. What Mo is running into, in this league, they do the big draft, all of his friends in Toronto, every year. But he had to miss it last year. And, flights these days, you look at the costs, and trying to justify a flight, especially if, in my case, if I'm trying to justify a flight to the girlfriend and I say, well, I'm going to go for a fantasy football draft, I don't think it's going to go well. I think I'd probably have to come up with a lie, an old college friend that's getting married she's never heard of. Reggie's getting married in Toronto. So what he's doing, Mo is going on tour right now, and it's called the Working Remotely Stand-Up Comedy Tour. And what he's doing, he's planning this comedy tour, planning the entire tour, stretching it out longer than he has been on the road before, stretching it so he can jump across the border back into the great land of Canada and join this fantasy football draft. And you can check him out if you are anywhere between Atlanta and Toronto. Any listeners out there, check out Mo. Go check out one of the shows. Ask him how the draft's going. Give him some fantasy advice along the way, maybe. He's going to start off in Kingsport, Tennessee on the 8th of September. Next night in Pittsburgh. Then on the 10th, he's in Buffalo, New York. 13th of September, they're back at it in Dayton, Ohio. The 14th in Louisville, Kentucky. Then in Knoxville, Tennessee on the 15th. So you can follow him along on Twitter there. Mo Aurora Comedy. There'll be some more dates coming. But isn't that what fantasy football is all about? Just because he's in this fantasy league with these friends that stayed connected, if those 16 friends didn't have this league, well, then, you might get the odd email. A Facebook message that, we all send to our old college friends. Hey, how's it going? And they say they've got this and that, and you don't talk again for a year. But that's why this is fantastic. And, Mo says in his email, fantasy football is the difference between me having a dream and making it my job. And that's awesome. So thanks for sharing that, Mo. Everyone give Mo a follow, and check out his comedy, too. If you don't laugh enough at my show, just at the quality of my show, Mo will make you laugh after the show. So thanks again. Let's get in to my fantasy football rules. I struggled with what word to use. Should I call them rules? Is it fantasy football? Are these the gospel? No. But what I want to get into with these, like I said off the top, these are not laws. These are not things that you need to go into your draft. And this is not me saying, well, in round 1, you have to go running back, then wide receiver, then grab your quarter. That's not what this is about, because we've been beaten to death with that. If you listen to my podcast, I'm assuming you listen to a lot more. If you're only listening to mine, come on now. There's a search option at the bottom of the page. You got to find some others too. But we've been so swamped with rankings. Well, you're getting more rankings later. Hey. But stuff like that, we need to step back and just look at the philosophy of fantasy football, the idea of it. These are my 5 rules that you just need to consider. And if you just keep them in mind, I think they'll sway your decisions. And if you just act natural, everything's going to go okay on draft day. Rule number 1 for your fantasy football draft. Know what fantasy football is. What I mean by that is, when we say that we play fantasy football, do we really? Do we play it? Well, you play soccer. You play a video game. Fantasy football is just, it's betting. It's odds. It's probability. I don't know if it's really playing if I can set a team up against yours that's projected to score 100 points and yours is projected to score 50 and you can still beat me. That's not really playing. It's setting up probabilities. What fantasy football is giving your team the highest likelihood of winning every week. And that's all it is. We glorify it as this thing that has gurus and experts who are on the TV, which still crack me up. I mean, eat your heart out, NFL Network. Go for it. But still, we treat it as this real, living, breathing thing that we play and impact. I mean, I can go out there and start Jeremy Hill and get 0 points. And then start a running back you've never heard of and get 15. At a certain point, we don't control this. At a certain point, this is absurd. And my advice for you, if you're still one of those people, oh no, fantasy football, it's for real, you've got to be good. Try to explain fantasy football to your girlfriend, boyfriend, a family member, person at work, someone who isn't into football at all. And they'll give you that blank stare, and you'll keep going, and you'll keep saying, and no, but it's really cool because it helps you follow, and they'll just keep looking more confused, and you'll slowly come to this horrible realization that this thing that you spend so much of your day doing is kind of ridiculous. And I only tell you that because I've had the exact same experience myself. Like, what do you mean? So do you control the players? No, we don't control the players. Well, what do you do with them? Well, we make them in our lineup. Well, what happens then? Do they just sit there? Yeah, they just sit there while I watch the games. Well, like, do you do anything for the... No, I don't do any. You know what I mean? Give your team a chance. Enjoy the games. But if you don't win, it's not because you did anything wrong. You're giving yourself a chance. Some weeks you'll give yourself a 45% chance. Some weeks it's a 55% chance. If you give yourself the 55% chance more often, you'll make the playoffs. Rule number 2 for your fantasy football draft in 2015, make your own mistakes. This is an idea that I got from the strangest of places. I was watching A Football Life on Matt Millen. And Matt Millen famously led the Detroit Lions to that 0-16 season. He built a disaster of a football team. But sometimes it's just as important to pay attention to those who have failed greatly as it is to pay attention to those who have succeeded, who have reached a great level of success in sports. The one thing that jumped out to me from that entire show that Millen has ever said, he said if he could do it all over again, he would make his own mistakes. Now, I don't think he was trying to pass off blame at all, but he said there were situations where he listened to other people. And he made their mistakes, and it comes down on him, general manager. But he said if he could do it again, he'd make his own mistakes, and that's what I'm telling you to do. Now, I don't mean that you have to go out and make up your own top 200 list. That's a bit extreme. But make your own mistakes. If you have an opinion about a player, let's do this for an example. Say that you're not quite sure about drafting Alfred Morris. Well, make up your own opinion first. Don't do anything else. Make up your own opinion on Alfred Morris before you go online, before you listen to a podcast. Make that opinion. And say that opinion is, you know what? I think Alfred Morris is going to have a big year. Well, take that opinion and keep it in mind and Google him. Read about him. And listen to my podcast. Listen to another podcast from the Dynasty Sports Empire Podcast Network. Go listen to some other podcasts. If you find one that agrees with you, let that strengthen your idea. If you find one that disagrees with you, then reconsider. You can say, oh no, they're wrong. I'm still confident. That's what you need to do. Because if you go into a draft just following the same groupthink that you're going to get from all of these shows, then you're in trouble because you're not thinking for yourself. And it's important to think for yourself, which brings us to rule number 3. Plan, but still react. One thing I cannot stand, and I feel like I start every sentence with that on this podcast. Let me tell you what I hate. Kids on my lawn. But one thing I can't stand with fantasy football coverage, conversation, is just this need for strategy. I get questions all the time. Hey, I've got this pick. Should I go wide receiver here, then running back the next round? What if this running back isn't there? Should I go running back in round 1 instead? Whatever. When your pick comes around, I'm going to go with best player available almost any of my picks this year. I'm really going to. And I don't think that you need to enter with a huge strategy. And I don't think you should enter your draft with a strategy of rounds by position. Don't do that. You will hamstring yourself, and you'll really cloud your judgment. But do plan a bit. It's okay to have a list of players you're not going to touch. It's okay to look through and highlight some players and even write them down next to you and say, lower, higher. Just put a note next to these players and remind yourself that when they show up on the top of the draft board, you don't like them as much as the ESPN or Yahoo rankings do. You want to wait a little bit. But also, write down some names that are maybe ranked in the 80 to 100 region that you want to start looking at around pick 65 or 70. Before your friends scroll down their draft board, how about that's you? How about you jump down and do that? Have some notes, have some ideas, but don't let yourself get locked in, because then you are done. That's basically, you're running an auto draft with your hands, if that's what you're doing. So plan, but still react. React to the picks in front of you, but do it properly. Don't be caught in a run on quarterbacks. Don't rush out and draft a running back because the guy ahead of you did. But if you react to the draft and follow a loose, intelligent plan, you will win more than you lose. Rule number 4, balance your risks. This is a question I get often. Hey, what do you do in the late rounds? Do you like to go for safe guys that will give you a strong option on the bench, or lottery tickets, high upside guys? This is the most boring rule, but it's one of the most important. You have to balance them. What I mean by this, if you start off, and in the first, somewhere in the first few rounds, you grab someone like Eddie Lacy and Aaron Rodgers as your quarterback. Or you go out and you get Le'Veon Bell and Andrew Luck. If you've got those names at the top of your roster, and you fill in some good, reliable receivers, then when you're getting in rounds 8, 9, 10, you can take some shots. Because you know you've got locks on your roster. That's one of those situations where you can be the first guy that grabs Arian Foster, because you know your roster is going to stay afloat for the year. So if you have some certainty early in the draft, then you give yourself the opportunity to take on some risks. But at the same time, if you are going to run with a risky quarterback, maybe you're one of those people that really likes Sam Bradford this year. And maybe you've got a running back who isn't a sure thing. Maybe a LaShawn McCoy, DeMarco Murray, one of these guys that's ranked very high, and I expect to do well, but still has that possibility to break down, get injured, run into some hard times. Then maybe you want to pick a little safer in rounds 6, 7, 8, 9. That's when you want to grab a player, here I am again, like a Marquez Colston, someone like that. Like a Frank Gore a little bit. These players that you know what they're going to do. That's not very exciting in fantasy football, but it's really valuable. So you set a base with your roster, and then very late, you can take some flyers. It's all about when you set your roster's base. If you set a base with your roster in the first 5 rounds, and you've got safe, reliable, talented picks, fire away. Ready, fire, aim, close your eyes and fire. But if you wait until rounds 6, 7, 8 to really solidify your base and be honest with yourself, then you've got to make a few safe picks to save yourself. Because the reality is, more often than not, when you try to find a sleeper, it doesn't work. There's a reason they're called sleepers, is because they're not good enough yet to be legitimate options. They don't just hide. People just haven't missed out on great talent. That's how it goes. So balance your risks. And number 5, learn from the past, recognize the future. One thing that I recommend everyone does before their fantasy draft, especially if you're in a keeper league, or even if you're not in a keeper league, in this league, go to one of your other leagues. Look at your draft from 2014. I did that yesterday in both of my leagues, and I put it side by side. My draft that year in late August, next to the roster I finished up with in December. Those two things are not the same. There are trades, there are waiver additions, and it's amazing to see how much your roster does change. And that's fantastic, because that means, if you don't have the draft you want, there's hope. And the saying is true. You cannot win your league on draft day, but you can lose it. And recognize the future. If you don't get that second running back you want, fine. C.J. Anderson wasn't drafted in a damn league last year. And over the second half, he won people a lot of games. Every year, there are players that by the end of the year, we look at them and say, how was that guy not drafted in round 2? Just make sure you're the person that gets that player. But understand again that the draft is not the be-all, end-all. And I guess as a sub-rule to rule number 5, at your fantasy draft, don't be an asshole. Every draft has that. You've got the guy that makes the pick and says, wow, I can't believe you guys didn't pick Tom Brady. I got Brady. And I know it's just free Brady, of course, but in every fantasy draft, there's the idiot. Don't let that idiot be you, because that idiot rarely wins. If somebody picks a crazy player you wouldn't have picked, shut up. Let them do it. It only helps you. Don't call them out. If they're picking poorly, let them pick poorly, and it's more likely that you win. I feel like Jackie Moon up here. Everybody love everybody. I've got a ring up here that says ELE. And on that note, we're going to break into some tight end rankings. How about that? So know what fantasy football is. Make your own mistakes. Plan but still react. Balance your risks. Then learn from the past and recognize the future. And if you do all of that, I think you will win more often than you lose. So jumping in quickly to the backup punters' tight end rankings. Now we're 23 minutes into the show right now. We won't go through these as slowly as we do with running back and wide receiver. Now I said at the top, I teased it because I know everyone's just here dying to hear tight end rankings. But tight end is a position of interesting value, strange value, and it comes in tiers. And I'll get to that once we reach tier number 3. So I'll start off with tier number 1, which is Rob Gronkowski, period. Everyone knows that. If you get Gronkowski as your tight end, you're going to have the best tight end. Now, he's going to get overdrafted. I've seen him going as high as 5, 6, 7, which I wouldn't do, but if you do it, fine. You've solidified a position, good for you. That's tier number 1. Tier number 2 comes with Jimmy Graham, Travis Kelce, and Greg Olsen, who I have ranked 2, 3, and 4. Jimmy Graham, some good reports that he's really clicking with Russell Wilson. Now, I think that people went a little too far saying that he would be, he'll be terrible in Seattle. He's not going to get the, he's going to be a bust. I mean, people just want clicks. It's the offseason. Fine. Go get them. Travis Kelce, if he gets on the field the majority of the time, which he struggled to do last year, whether that's just poor coaching decision or he wasn't ready, I don't know what that was. That was strange. but he looks like he's going to be part of that Kelsey, Macklin, and Charles triangle that Alex Smith is going to use. And I think he's going to be a touchdown machine this year. I really do think he will be. And then Greg Olsen, a model of consistency. He's one of those football players. He's in my Frank Gore category. Just a guy I love. Goes out there, does the job, and does it again next week. So those guys are 2, 3, and 4. That's the second tier. Everyone else, for me, is in tier number 3. So from number 5 on, everybody else is in tier number 3. And we'll run through these quickly. We'll say a few words about each. And then I'll tell you why that tier is important and how you should exploit it. So number 5, I've got Martellus Bennett. If you're going to draft Martellus Bennett, ride him hot for a few weeks and then try to trade him, is my advice. I've seen it happen years and years in a row. He comes out of the gates hot, he's a big performer, and then he hits a wall. Don't let him be the anchor that kills your team, but let him be the guy that helps you get a few wins early in the season, especially if Kevin White's down, Alshon Jeffrey's hurting. Jay Cutler likes him. Number 6, I struggled with this one, but I put Jason Witten. I think without DeMarco Murray, he's due to bounce back. And although I don't think Jason Witten has a good chance at all to be a top 5 tight end, I also don't think he has a good chance at all to drop any lower than number 8, probably. He's one of those guys that you can just plug in every week and you're going to get your points. You won't have one of those Gronkowski games. You won't have a massive ceiling like you might get with a guy further down the list. But it's pretty rare that you can find a tight end you just play every week. And that's what Witten is. Number 7, I've got Delaney Walker. I think unless Dorial Green-Beckham really comes out of nowhere and starts to shine, which he's starting to, keep an eye on him. Kendall Wright is really no great weapon. He's a guy that works in between the 20s. You need someone that works in the red zone. That's Delaney Walker. I think he's going to be Marcus Mariota's favorite target. Number 8, Julius Thomas in Jacksonville. Anywhere else in this league, anywhere in the league, he'd be ranked higher. But still his talent, and he's a red zone target. Number 9, Jordan Cameron. This is a guy, going back to that Witten comment, Jordan Cameron, he could finish in the top 5. God, he probably even has some top 3 potential, some of it. But he's also got the potential to finish outside of the top 20. If you're drafting Jordan Cameron, pay attention for some names later on that you should also roster. Number 10, Zach Ertz. A lot of hype with him in Philadelphia. And then, of course, when there's hype, there's a lot of people who just intentionally go the other way to, no, actually, he's not. I don't know about Zach Ertz. I am optimistic. I think a lot of it depends on the play of Jordan Matthews, Nelson Aguilar, Riley Cooper, and how comfortable is Sam Bradford pushing the ball out to his wide receivers? Because Sam Bradford does like himself a good tight end. And Chip Kelly likes Zach Ertz. Number 11, I've got Owen Daniels. He's now playing with Peyton Manning. If Owen Daniels were anywhere else, he wouldn't be on this list, but he's with Peyton Manning now. And it looks like he's going to get most of those starting snaps at tight end. Number 12, Larry Donnell. I think he is worse than his big burst last year, but better than his bad games last year. He is someone that will still see targets, especially if that running game improves, especially if Odell Beckham Jr. can drag coverage all over the field, which he's going to. Larry Donnell is going to get a real big dose of red zone targets, like really big. You might have some weeks with 1 or 2 points, but if you pick the right week, you'll have 10 or 12. Number 13, I've got Tyler Eifert there for the Bengals. I think there's a lot of potential with him. If A.J. Green can do what A.J. Green does, if Jeremy Hill can pull in some linebackers, why not Eifert? Number 14, Dwayne Allen. I'd like it if he could separate from Colby Fleener a little bit more. I don't think he's going to be a guy you want on your roster every week, but there could be one week. And number 15, just because I refuse to put this guy in the sleepers, I think he can be better than a sleeper, and that's Austin Seferian-Jenkins. I've been beating the drum for Seferian-Jenkins all offseason, even before they drafted Jameis Winston, but now especially since they've drafted Jameis Winston. He will be the security blanket. He's going to have some red zone looks, and I think he takes a year number 2 jump. So from 5 to 15, if I have all of those players as one tier, now obviously Martellus Bennett, Jason Witten, they're better than Austin Seferian-Jenkins, but not to the point that their average draft position is going to suggest. Bennett and Witten, Delaney Walker, Julius Thomas, Jordan Cameron, these big-name guys, they're going to go early. Because once somebody drafts that Greg Olsen and that second tier is gone, people will panic, and they will want to get the top end of tier number 3. What I'm telling you is that you don't need the top end. The value that you can get on a Eifert, Seferian-Jenkins, Ertz, very late in your draft is way better than the value you will get when Martellus Bennett is picked. You won't be losing out on a lot of production, and you'll be gaining a lot of value at another position by addressing that one. So unless I get a top guy at good value, I'm going to wait around. Now here's a couple, I don't call them sleepers. It's tough to be a sleeper at tight end, and I hate the word sleeper. But the first tier of guys that I would look for, maybe ones you'd want to have on your roster if you do have a back-end guy. Vernon Davis. Why the hell not? He was Colin Kaepernick's man when Kaepernick was good. Colin Kaepernick is no longer good, so maybe he goes back to Davis. And I've read some really encouraging reports about him. Kyle Rudolph in Minnesota, I think he gets hyped a little bit too much, but the talent is still there. The physical build is still there, especially if he could turn into a red zone target. Depends on if Adrian Peterson just takes on everything over the heart of the field, but we'll see. And then Antonio Gates. He's going to miss the first 4 games, but if you draft someone like Ertz, Cameron, Owen Daniels, and then stash Gates, well, if your guy doesn't work out, then you have Antonio Gates, and that's going to work just fine. And then the second tier, maybe we'll call these guys sleepers. I've got Richard Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers now with Jordy Nelson out. I don't care about that in terms of yardage, targets, anything. But Jordy Nelson was the touchdowns. I don't think Randall Cobb matches the touchdown total from last year. I think he had 12 last year. That's going to be tough for him. And then you're taking 13 touchdowns from Jordy Nelson off the roster. Those cannot all go to Randall Cobb. Those cannot all go to Devontae Adams. And I don't think many of them are going to go to Montgomery or Janis. Richard Rodgers will get a few of those. If you pick the right week, you'll be happy. And then Eric Ebron. Detroit, last year it looked like they wasted a pick on him, but people need to understand that tight ends are not wide receivers. They do not come along from day one and explode. That's why you're going to see Max Williams take some lumps this year in Baltimore, but I still like the guy. Eric Ebron, if you are looking for a guy with the potential to be a top 10 tight end and also a, outside the top 30, it's Ebron. His skill level is obscene. In terms of physical talent, it's as good as you're going to find in the NFL. It's absolutely fantastic. Now, is there room for him to work with Golden Tate, Calvin Johnson on the outside? There should be, especially with Matthew Stafford, who's a quarterback that I believe in. So maybe if you have a tight end you're not sure about, you take a 15th round flyer on Eric Ebron. Maybe you do. So those are the tight end rankings. If you'd like to go back through the quarterback, wide receiver, and running back rankings, you can jump onto iTunes, Stitcher. Make sure you subscribe. Download every week. Or you can jump onto YouTube and also subscribe there. Follow the show. You can go back. The last few episodes cover all of that and more. So this is, we did call this a bonus episode. In large part, I gave you this bonus episode as well because there may not be one next week. Follow along on Twitter at The Backup Punter, and I'll announce it on there. I'm making the big move up to Toronto this week, taking the Backup Punter podcast studio with me. So the show will go on for many, many hundreds more episodes, we hope. But with the big move, with a big truck and some big furniture, and some big problems that are likely to arise along the way, the podcast, in all honesty, may have to take another 1-week hiatus. It's almost like I'm getting an ego with these hiatuses. Hiati? I don't know. Anyways, my name is Keegan Matheson. I thank you again for joining. I know that you don't join by accident each week. And I know that you don't just download it for something to do, so I really do appreciate the choice you're making. And it does mean a lot to me. So reach out over Twitter, email thebackupunter@gmail.com, like it on Facebook, anything that you want to hear on the podcast. Believe me, if you tweet in a question, I'm all ears. We'll get it on the show. We'll discuss it. Any ideas you have that you want to have discussed, I'm all ears. So this is Keegan Matheson signing off. And as always, and as forever, I hope that all of your punts in life stop on the 1 yard line. Let's talk next week, maybe the week after.